Welcome to the College Admissions Process Podcast presented by Prep Expert. Prep Expert offers live online SAT and ACT courses with the best score guarantees, instructors, and curriculum. Go to prepexpert.com to guarantee your child's success. What's up, podcast friends, and thank you for listening to the College Admissions Process Podcast. While analyzing the podcast data, I realized that many of the earlier episodes, some of which received the most overall downloads and are still extremely relevant today, are not being listened to as much as the newly released episodes. This is why I created the alphabetical list of colleges available on the podcast with the link to the related interview to the right of each school. Please use the alphabetical list as part of your college search, which can be found in the show notes and on my website, www.collegeadmissionstalk.com. The alphabetical list serves as an on-demand virtual college fair with schools from throughout the country. To highlight how valuable the alphabetical list is, I will release past episodes that receive the highest overall downloads on Wednesdays throughout the summer. Please share the alphabetical list with anyone you think that may benefit, as it has proven to be such a valuable tool for so many listeners. So are you ready? Let's talk about it. Welcome to the CAP, the College Admissions Process Podcast. I am your host, John Durante, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you today Larry Alterman, who's the manager of East Coast Recruitment at Michigan State. Now, Larry was with us back on episode 7, where we talked specifically about Michigan State University. I'm also so happy to welcome Logan Powell, who's the Associate Provost for Enrollment and the Dean of Admission at Brown University. Larry and Logan, thank you so much for being here today on this collaboration where we're going to talk about Brown and Michigan State. We're going to go over some similarities and differences. Again, gentlemen, welcome. How you guys doing today?
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me.
Doing great, John. Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's an honor and pleasure. So let's start with a bit of a twist. Logan, as someone who represents Brown University, I'd love to hear your take on what makes Michigan State University appealing to so many students. And Larry, I'm going to come back to you with the same question if you don't mind, but let's start this one with Logan.
John, I love this question, and I'm totally sincere about this because I think, one of the things that I love about my job is I get to talk broadly about college admission and financial aid, and not just about Brown University, because there's so many incredible schools in the country, and Michigan State University is one of them. So I love that this is the start of the question because there's so many incredible things that I can say about MSU. I've been there many times. It's a beautiful campus in East Lansing, right along the Red Cedar River. It's really, I think, a unique institution for a number of reasons. Number one, the first land-grant college of its kind in the United States. And there's also this incredible combination of intellectual vitality, demonstrated by the fact that MSU is home to 2 Nobel Prize winners, 20 Rhodes Scholars, and of course a number of other, Truman and Mitchell and Marshall Scholars, 200 academic programs, 17 degree granting colleges. But combine that with the fact that they also are home to one of the most incredible athletic programs in the country, nationally competitive, across the board in the Big Ten Conference. And I would end with this also, in part as an homage to Larry and others, and that is to say that they've got an extraordinary alumni base, incredibly loyal, and a group of alumni around the world who really love their alma mater.
Well, we really appreciate that overview. Now, Larry, Logan definitely did his homework here, and I hope you did the same. So same question to you, Larry, about Brown University.
Sure. Well, I really appreciate all the kind words and knowledge Logan has of Michigan State. I've also been on Brown's campus, and to me, that's one of the strengths, the fact that they do have really a very nice campus, but yet it's also part of the city of Providence. And so I think that gives, students more opportunity, being both in a campus setting and having all the things available in a city setting as well. But in terms of academics, one thing to me that is so impressive about Brown and that really sets it apart from the rest of the Ivy League is the open curriculum. It gives students great academic flexibility and allows for a personalized course of study. And from my experience working with high achieving students, academic flexibility is something that high achieving students very often want to have. They want to be able to explore. And the curriculum at Brown is set up just that way. And like I said, that is not something, and Logan, please correct me if I'm wrong, that is not really available in that anywhere in the Ivy League other than at Brown University.
That's exactly right, Larry. Thank you for the nice words about Brown.
Well, thank you both for the great overviews. Now, let's turn back to your own institutions. We're going to bring the spotlight back on to yourselves. So, Larry, we're going to start with you. Can you tell us what else makes Michigan State so special, and what are the qualities and experience that you believe truly define MSU and make it a top-notch choice for so many students? And then, Logan, of course, we're going to come back to you with the same question. Larry?
Sure. And this is something I'm asked all the time by students. I think one is the fact a great choice in academic programs, over 200 majors, over 400 areas of study, the ability to study abroad, every continent on the globe, including Antarctica, so much to be involved in, over 1,000 clubs and student organizations. Certainly, as Logan mentioned, having big time college athletics and being part of a place with great spirit. Also, academically, a culture of undergraduate research. So it's possible, even for an 18-year-old first semester student, to be involved in research and a collaborative culture on campus. Our campus is basically like going to school in a park. We have over 22,000 trees on our campus. We have 2 botanical gardens. As Logan mentioned, we have the river running right through it and a nice college town right across the street. And then the last thing, although some think it's the most important, it's a very friendly and welcoming Midwest environment. As I always tell students who I work with in the Northeast, people are very likely to say hello or smile unprovoked. And a lot of times students aren't used to that, but it makes Michigan State become very small very quickly.
Well, I appreciate that. And I remember again back on episode 7 where you talked about your culture and the collaborative nature and how everyone is so friendly. So, again, Larry, thank you for that overview. Logan, same question.
Well, Larry did such a great job introducing Brown in the beginning. I feel like I need to think about more to add. He did a fantastic job, and a lot of what he would say about Michigan State, I would also say about Brown in the sense that it's a beautiful campus. Would reiterate what he said earlier. One of the great strengths, and I'll talk about 3 things really quickly. One of the great strengths is our location. I'll start with that. In the city of Providence, it's a mid-sized city. It's the second largest metropolitan area in New England, so it's a totally walkable city. It's a beautiful, beautiful campus, but the city of Providence is right outside the gates. So you have easy access to everything that Providence has to offer. Boston's an hour away. New York is 3 hours away. So you've really got, kind of the best of both worlds, a clearly defined campus, but access to, all of the greatness that is available in the city of Providence and the state of Rhode Island. A really beautiful place to visit, spend 4 years, or even to live, as I do, and I've really loved it. Number 2, let me say another word about the academic life and culture at Brown. Larry mentioned it a little bit, and that is one of the things that makes us distinct in the Ivy League is that we do have the open curriculum, which allows students to be the architect of their own education. So what that means is that students, when they come in, do not have to satisfy some series of distribution requirements. Students come in, and because we admit students who are so intellectually curious, they're free to explore. And so a first-year student might come in, and in their first semester, when they take 4 courses, they might take everything ranging from neuroscience to computer science to economics to foreign language. So that kind of breadth of offerings, I think, really inspires our students to spread their academic wings. We also admit students who really are I guess I would call them intellectually fearless. That is to say, they're not afraid of academic challenge. They want to take those tough courses. They want to take courses that maybe get them a little bit out of their comfort zone, because that's what has defined them over the course of their high school careers. The academic culture, though, outside of just the academic curriculum, is something that I have to make mention of. And it's important to sort of reiterate or point out something that may or may not be obvious in an open curriculum school like ours. And that is that every single class is filled with students who want to be there. You take the classes at Brown only because you want to be in them. And so it leads to a kind of energy that I think is really hard to duplicate. And it's something that we're really proud of. On top of that, there's an incredibly collaborative nature. So, students who are thinking about a place like Brown have usually done very, very well in high school. And it's often been, in a very competitive high school environment. And I think one of the things that they really are relieved to find when they get to Brown is that there's an incredible challenge, but there's also incredible collaboration and support. It doesn't feel like a forced march. It really feels like a great journey. And that's something that we really try to inculcate. The last thing that I would point out is, there's a lot of conversation in the country right now about the cost of anything, the cost of everything. And so students very often and families very often are really thoughtful about the cost of college and the potential return on investment. And so Brown has made deep commitments to financial aid that make us one of the most affordable colleges in the country. We're completely need blind. We meet full demonstrated need. We have no loans in our packaged financial aid offers. We're need blind for international students as well as U.S. citizens. And we also have removed home equity as an asset consideration. So if you're a middle class family from anywhere in the country, we're not asking you to borrow against the value of your home. And so we want Brown to be accessible to students from all socioeconomic backgrounds. It's a great opportunity for us. We don't take it for granted, and we want to make sure that students know that we're making decisions based on academic merit, fit with the campus, and not the ability to pay the cost of tuition.
Well, we appreciate you talking about the need blind nature of Brown and that you have an open curriculum where students, first of all, want to be there. And as you said, they are the architects of their own educations. And it's ironic that you mentioned architects because I have a cousin who met his wife at not Brown, but at RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design, which I know is right down the block.
Right
So,
down the hill.
Logan,
That's right.
if you don't mind, could you just elaborate a little bit in terms of the relationship that Brown has with the Rhode Island School of Design?
It's a great question. There are great neighbors, literally a block away. We actually share a degree program with them. We have what's called the Brown RISD Dual Degree Program. It's a 5-year program. The way that students apply for it is that they apply to both Brown and RISD independently, and they apply to the Brown RISD Dual Degree Program. And the faculty and admission offices in each of those institutions will make the decisions about who will be admitted. It's a highly selective program. It's about a 2% acceptance rate, so it is tough. The thing to point out, though, is that students can be admitted to Brown or RISD or both, and not necessarily admitted to the Brown RISD dual degree program. So
Hmm.
it's a very small program. It's 15 students per year. Students should not be discouraged by the statistics around the competitiveness of it, because many of the students who apply to the program, even if they don't get in, still end up coming to Brown or going to RISD.
Well, we appreciate that insight and overview. Thank you both so much for it. And Logan, we're back to you again. Given the increase in applications and noting that Brown University is no longer test optional, how does your institution handle the influx of applications and determine the number of students to accept, waitlist, or even deny? And what are your institutional priorities, if you don't mind sharing, when it comes to the freshman class size you're looking to admit?
Sure. So it's a great question, and there's a lot in that question that I'll get through as efficiently as I possibly can. The important thing to start with, the beginning of the question talked about application volume, and certainly our application volume has gone up in recent years, particularly when we had to pivot to a test optional admission policy, really driven by a global pandemic. We had required standardized testing prior to COVID in 2020. We are going back to requiring standardized testing in the upcoming academic and admission cycle, the year 2024, 2025. And so what's important to talk about is, even though there was pretty stunning growth in the applicant pool, last year we had 49,000 applicants, the process is still a human-driven, human-centric process. The process actually didn't change. What changed was the number of hours we worked in a day. We might have been required to work a little bit more, into the evening or over weekends. But that's what we signed up for, and we love it. This is what we love to do. It's really a passion for us. Those of us who work in the field of admission, I'm sure Larry feels the same way. But it's important for me to say to families who may be listening that the size of the applicant pool doesn't change our process. Our process is still one that's based on individualized, holistic, and contextual review. So even when our applicant pool reached an all-time high of 51,000 2 years ago, it didn't change the process. We still opened every application, one application at a time, and we went through it one page at a time, and we looked for the best in each of those applicants. Now, the other part of your question was about institutional priorities and how we structure the class. I'll talk about this really quickly. We want the broadest array of perspectives available in the world represented on the Brown campus. And we want that grounded in academic excellence. So we're looking first at students who are academically superlative. And then beyond that, we're looking for the broadest range of backgrounds and perspectives we can possibly identify. So that's students from small towns, from rural backgrounds, from big cities. It's students from public schools, private schools, charter schools, you name it. We want students who are the first in their families to go to college. We want students from all socioeconomic backgrounds. We want student veterans. We want student athletes. We want leaders. We want scientists, aspiring scientists, researchers, humanists. We want the full range of representation on campus. And we want those students to really be a strong part of the Brown community. We don't want students who are just going to sequester themselves away in a laboratory or a library for 4 years and come out on graduation day with translucent skin and a vitamin D deficiency. We really want those students, on top of being smart, on top of being from a range of different backgrounds, we want them really to be engaged in the life of the college. We think really specifically as well about making sure that we enroll the right number of students. In the past few years, our target first-year class size has been 1,700. We have an undergraduate enrollment of about 7,000. And so, this process is certainly a human-driven process. It's a little bit of art, but there's also some science involved. We have to be really thoughtful about the number of applicants we admit every year to get to that class of 1,700. And so we can get into the admission details. There's some really sort of wonky terms and statistics that I can share. I'm happy to talk about that a little bit more. But the point is, we're making decisions one case at a time, putting together a community from around the world, representing the best strengths that we can possibly identify, and inviting them to join Brown.
Well, I love that you talk about putting together a community, right, from around the world. Like you said, students that come from urban, rural, suburban environments, big school, small school, scientists, athletes, and anything and everything in between. So I appreciate that. And I love how you talked about you had approximately 49,000 applications for a freshman class of approximately 1,700. And I mentioned that because there's a lot of students that apply to schools like Brown, Michigan State. Obviously, there's over 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States alone. And sometimes they get rejected, right? And they think, boy, was it the essay? Was it something that I put or didn't have in my activity sheet? Was it my SAT? Was it this? Was it that? And sometimes it's just understanding that an institution gets 49,000 applications for a freshman class of approximately 1,700. And so we talk a lot about the fact that if we could determine who the top 25% of the students that unfortunately don't make the cut, if we could look at their profiles, I bet you that first 25% is very similar to the profiles of the students that were accepted when you're getting 49,000 applications for only 1,700 seats. Would you agree with that, or am I off?
That's a great point, John. It's one of the things I wish I could do is talk to every applicant
Right.
in our applicant pool, because they're incredible, and you want to be able
Right.
to tell them how great they are, even when we're not able to offer them admission. Oh, look, we could easily, in an applicant pool of 49,000, we could enroll that class 2 or 3 times over, and you probably wouldn't see any major change in the academic quality. That's how strong the applicant pool is. So we're not making decisions between who we think can do the work at Brown and who we think cannot do the work at Brown, almost everyone who applies is really academically sterling. It's these very fine, these very fine details that we get into, and so we can talk about this a little bit more. But it's a lesson, I think, to anyone listening, to remind them that it's not just about the numbers. We don't
Right.
admit based
Right.
on SAT score and GPA. I mean,
Right.
look, we'd be out of a job if that were the case. Our job is to actually make decisions about people regardless of their numbers. And it happens that we have an applicant pool with applicants who have very strong academic credentials, but we're not just making a decision about those numbers. We're making a decision about the people.
Well, we really appreciate that insight. And again, speaking to the students, I wanted you to hear that because there's a lot that you do control in the admissions process when you're putting your application together. And then there are things that you don't control, such as the fact that a school may get X amount of applications for a much smaller number in terms of whatever that number is for the freshman class. So again, Logan, we really appreciate that. So Larry, back to you. Given the increase in applications and noting that MSU is still test optional, how does your institution handle the influx of applications and determine the number of students, again, to accept, waitlist, or even deny? And what are your institutional priorities when it comes to that freshman class size based on the number of overall applications that you get?
Sure. Well, we set another record on applications for this coming fall class. We had over 61,000
Wow. Hmm.
applications for the first year class. And so, it does create, I would say, the challenge of congratulations, admissions counselors, you're going to get to read more applications. But, as Logan said, when you work in college admissions, particularly if you do it more than 1 or 2 years, if you continue on, as I know so many people in college admissions who have been around for a long period of time, you enjoy getting to know students, whether you get to know them one-on-one or you get to know and learn about them through their application. It is really some of the joy of what we do, of really getting to see, what did somebody take advantage of? What did they do? How did they grow? And, to me, sometimes you just read an application and it makes you feel better,
Hmm.
because you look at how somebody's grown from, ninth through 12th. When you think about the last few years, we've read a lot, we've heard a lot from students about how they went through the pandemic, how it impacted them and their families. This is really very often very interesting things to be, involved in. Now, kind of getting back to the numbers, pulling back to that, we are looking at a freshman class a little bit larger than Brown, of
Hmm.
about 9,600
Right.
in the
Right.
first year class. And, so we are not as selective as Brown. And just for all people out there, just to kind of add something else, 80% of the colleges and universities in this country admit 50% or more of the applicants. So I just think one of the things that's important in this process for any student, any family, as you're going through this process, when you have schools on your list with lower admit rates, make sure you have a balanced list. Make sure you have some other options that you're excited about. Because the reality is, I'm a firm believer that out of 4,000 colleges and universities, there's more than one fit for somebody in the United States. And so, you can continue to go on and make great academic progress and go on. I think that's important. I would say, we are test optional. And so this gives students the option of applying to us without a test score, and no one's penalized for that. So students in test optional schools, I think, should feel very comfortable of not submitting, a test score. Without it, we still have a lot of information to make an evaluation of a student and whether they can fit. And in terms of fit, I agree very much with Logan. It is about creating a community, because it's not as if we're accepting a student. When we accept a student, When we offer admission, we have to expect that they're going to come and they're going to have to interact with the student we accepted the day before and the day after and the week before and the week after. And so hopefully, and one of the exciting things of a student body is you bring people from different walks of life, from different geography, because we represent all 50 states, 130 countries around the globe on our campus. And these students interacting creates a great energy. And that also becomes the learning. In other words, it's not just what a professor says in a classroom. How do people respond to it? What is the discussion? And if we're doing our job in admissions, it's a robust discussion with people from all different viewpoints.
Well, that's terrific, Larry. You brought up so many great points. I want to repeat some of them. First of all, you mentioned the fact that 80% of the over 4,000 in colleges and universities throughout the country admit 50% or more of their applications, which I think is a great number for students to keep in mind. But also the fact that you mentioned a balanced list. So we talk a lot about stress in college admissions. And I just want to repeat something to students that if on your list, you're only applying to schools that accept at 15% or less, you have to understand because of the reasons that we discussed, those schools in reality are reach schools for everyone. It doesn't matter how academic you are. It doesn't matter that you were the captain of a varsity team. If you're applying to schools that admit at 15% or less, it is a reach school for everyone. So to Larry's point, that balanced list is so important. And don't put a school on your list that you wouldn't actually go to if we're accepted to it, right? So, again, these are just great pieces of advice and insights for students and their parents. Thank you both so much for your perspectives. Now, let's dive into your application review process a little further, Larry. Could you start by walking us through MSU's holistic application review process?
Sure, be happy to. So, what we're looking through are multiple different pieces, including somebody's academic performance in high school, the strength of a curriculum, trends in academic performance. If test results are submitted, we're considering them, but we're also looking at what kind of involvement has a student had with leadership? What kind of talents? What kind of diversity of experience does a student bring? So these are all parts of it. And, we'll have multiple people who will review an application. And so it's always so interesting where then as other people look at it, and then they have a perspective as well. So students, even though we have a lot of applications, we are truly reviewing just the overall academic, and I would call it involvement experiences, starting in ninth grade all the way through into the senior year.
Well, we appreciate that, Larry. And Logan, we'd like to hear about Brown University's approach, and it would be great if you could highlight any significant differences between how a private institution like yours and, of course, MSU approach their holistic application review.
Sure. So I can speak for Brown in detail, obviously. We take, I would say, similar to what Larry described, a sort of what we would call a whole person review. That is to say, there will not be one piece of the application that determines the particular outcome in that case. We look at the entirety of the application for every single student. In order to be admitted to Brown, that application will receive multiple reviews. We want different perspectives because sometimes, another member of the staff will be able to add something more, a little more context, a little more texture. And that's really important to us. Our admissions staff is also representative of a broad range of backgrounds. And so we want those perspectives added to the admission review process. So we look at everything. As I mentioned before, it's not just, taking, SAT score and GPA and plotting them on a chart and saying, if you're above this mark, you're in. And if you're not, then we wish you well. We begin by looking at the person. We read their personal statement. We read their supplemental essays. We have 4 supplemental essay questions we ask on top of the questions that are required by the Common App. We require 3 letters of recommendation, 1 from a school counselor and 2 from solid area academic teachers. We also give students the opportunity to submit a video introduction where they can tell us in their own words who they are, why they're interested in Brown, what they're passionate about, what they like to do. They very often will, tell us, what they'd like to study and why. So it's just, every opportunity we can get to learn more about a student in all of their individuality and complexity, we take that opportunity. I want to drill down on one thing that Larry actually mentioned and just say a little bit more about it because it's really important. I'm glad that he talked about it. He talked about involvement outside of the classroom. Obviously, the work that a student does in the classroom is important to us. The opportunities that they have, what they've taken advantage of, and how well they've done. But we also look at what they do outside of class. And so this is an important thing to mention. I grew up in a low-income household. And so, during the summers, I didn't have the opportunity to, go to the kinds of camps that I would have liked to have gone to. It wasn't the reality that I grew up in. And that's the same for a lot of our applicants, both at Michigan State and at Brown. We have a lot of families where, they're working hard to make sure that they pay the rent or pay the mortgage, and the students don't, the students in our applicant pool don't come from the same opportunities. There's a range of opportunities that we see in the applicant pool. And so we value those students who are involved outside of class. Absolutely, when it includes things like part-time work or having to take care of younger siblings, being another adult in the home to take care of, say you have a multi-generational home and, the applicant has to take care of a grandparent and perhaps a younger sibling and they have to work, or they have a long commute on a bus to school. All of those pieces of information are important to us and help contextualize what we see in the rest of the application. So, for those families, for those students, when, say, for example, they don't have the time to join, a whole bunch of school clubs or participate in varsity athletics, that's okay. That's their real life, and we understand that. But, for that student who is participating in varsity athletics, we value that. For the student who's involved in student government or works for the school newspaper, that's wonderful. We just want to see that students are involved and engaged, and that, again, as Larry said, that they demonstrate leadership in some way. And it's really important to say, and I think Larry would agree with me, that doesn't mean that you're elected captain or president of everything. It means that you're leading by example. It means that you're a team player, you're working hard, you're showing up on time, you're contributing to the organization, to the team, to the group, because those are the things that we hope that you'll bring to our community as well.
Well, we really appreciate that. And folks, we just had the Dean of Admissions explain that everything that you do outside of the classroom is important. It's not just about being the captain of the varsity team or the president of the 12th grade class. If you have a part-time job, when you talk about leadership, there's so much leadership that is embedded in having your first part-time job. First of all, you have to show up, work, and answer to a boss. But also, if you're helping a family, whether it's paying rent or other expenses, that's something that's really important. You talked about taking care of a family member, whether it's a younger sibling, maybe it's an older relative, a grandparent. Very important. And you also mentioned if you happen to be in an area where you're taking a long commute to school. These are things that you should absolutely put on your activity sheet or somewhere in your application so that it gives context to the admissions professionals when they're reviewing your application holistically. Because remember, students, anything that you don't share with the admissions representatives, you're leaving it up to them to speculate as to why. So if I happen to be a student that works after school, which I did when I was much younger, that might be the reason why I'm not part of 5, 6, 7 clubs. So again, very important to include all of that in the overall application. In terms of this point, is there anything that you, Larry or Logan, you'd like to add in terms of that point?
The one thing I would just like to add in terms of activity for students, and if you remember nothing else that I say in this whole podcast, students and parents, please remember this. Please be involved in things you are passionate about. Please do not think you are trying to check a box. A, you will be happier. And B, in this process, somebody may ask you about the activity. Passion is very difficult to fake. So please be involved in what you care about. If you don't care about it anymore, try something else.
Hey, podcast friends, if you've been enjoying the College Admissions Process podcast, I'm excited to share my new book, Straight from the Admissions Office, Insider Strategies for College Applications. It's packed with insights and tips from over 250 podcast episodes with admissions professionals designed to make the college process less overwhelming. Whether you're a student, parent, or college counselor, it's a valuable resource for navigating the admissions process. By grabbing a copy, you're also helping to support the podcast. The links are in the show notes. Thank you, and best wishes to all with the college admissions process. That is great. Thank you so much, Larry. We really appreciate that. So let's dive into more specifics in terms of the application criteria. Logan, can you begin by discussing what specific aspects of an applicant's transcript are most important in Brown University's review process? And could you elaborate on whether these criteria differ based on a student's intended major? So again, we're going to start with Logan, and then we're going to come right back to you, Larry.
This is a great question, John, because I think students, when I talk to students, and I talk to students and parents all over the country, they're worried that what we do in the broad world of admission is compare students from one school to students from another school. And they think, well, which track should I choose, advanced placement or international baccalaureate? And I say, well, which do you have? You may not have a choice in this matter. You don't have a choice in how many AP courses, if any, your high school offers. So my message to families is make the most of what your high school offers. And please know that we're never comparing a student at one high school to a student at another high school. So that's the first really big point that I'd like to make. When we start reading applications and we read regionally so that we can get a better sense of the kinds of opportunities and curricula that are available in a city or in a state or in a region, we look very specifically at what the high school academic program involves and what's available to that student. For every individual applicant from that high school, we then look to see that they've taken advantage of as many opportunities as they can academically. So if that's an advanced placement curriculum or an honors curriculum, or say you have advanced courses or international baccalaureate courses, whatever the high school curriculum is that is available to you, make the most of it. Challenge yourself, but challenge yourself within reason. I think there are those students, and Larry and I, if we had $1 for every time we've been asked the question, and it goes something like this: should I take the AP course and get a B, or the non-AP course and get an A? Well, we'd be funding your podcast, John. But seriously, it's important to say that's a tough question to answer, in part because it depends on where you're applying. For many of the highly selective institutions, the honest and not smart alecky answer is you probably need to take the AP course and get an A. That's probably what you're going to need to do to really be competitive at a highly selective school. The schools that you talked about with, 15% acceptance rates or single digit acceptance rates. But I would say also important is to say, students need to calibrate. And so, we want them to have strength represented on their transcript, and not every student is great at every academic subject. That's totally, totally fine. So work to your strengths, do the best you can, and know that we're going to look at the applicant in their context and their context only. We're never going to compare an applicant from one institution to an applicant at another.
Well, I really appreciate that honesty. The question about whether to take that AP course or not, the fact that you talked about for a school like Brown University, which is obviously very competitive. Yes, not only take the AP, but hopefully, you're scoring that A. So That insight is tremendous and really important. But I also love how you talked about the fact that you're not comparing students from one high school to the high school down the block, right? And everyone has that high school down the block that they don't attend, that they always reference. But what you are looking at is you're reviewing the student based on the context of what is available to them. And that's what you ask. What was available? I'm sure you look at the school profile in case you don't know if it's some random school that you haven't reviewed before, but I know at Brown you've reviewed from every single school. But what was available to you? What did you choose to take? And how did you perform? Right. So you're not looking at XYZ high school compared to ABC high school. You're looking again at the individual student in the context of that review. So, Larry, coming back to you, same question about MSU, please.
Sure. So, Logan got us off to a great start because we definitely look at students within the context of their school. I can't possibly expect a student to take a level of course or a type of course that isn't offered in their school. And I'm going to add to that, there are schools I review, and I'm thinking right now, I won't mention the name of the school. I will tell you it's in the New York area, public high school that has no APs. And every now and then for fun, I tell people, oh, this school has no APs. And people are shocked. They're like, this is a strong, public high school in a strong area. How can that be? They don't want to be bound by that system. But in that school, they have different levels of coursework. So it is possible to look at a student and say, hey, what did they take advantage of there based on what's available there? And I think when you're looking in terms of evaluating a student, when you're looking at the rigor of their academic program, that is a very useful tool. And what we will see very often too with students, particularly if they're getting stronger in their time in high school, is their rigor is getting stronger. But another important point for students and parents, please select the level of rigor that is appropriate for you. It does not matter what level your friends are taking, okay? That has no bearing in your academic level and what's going to lead to your academic growth, because you might not be ready for an IB or AP class now. Maybe you're ready for an honors and you do well in that, and then you can move up to an AP, and then when you take them, you're ready to get that A in an AP. And so growth is something that we can see academically, I feel, in a transcript. And we can see it based on not just the grades, but on the levels of rigor. And so there are schools where I read a lot of applications from every year, and I'm quite familiar, but I still look at that profile to see if there's a change. And there are times, and people are shocked by this when it happens, where I will call a counselor in that school and I'll ask about a particular course and try to understand like how rigorous it is. It's our job to try to give the student the fairest evaluation possible. And at times it just requires that little bit of extra effort, on our part. But, the combination of a transcript and a profile is very valuable. I will also add Michigan State and other schools that are less selective. Many of us have honors colleges, and our honors college is very selective. And I've actually done some review, actually helping my colleagues at the honors college out. And so then in that case, we are looking for those students who have taken a good portion of AP or IB and scored very well. So, that would be one case where we would look differently at an applicant, but in terms of other academic programs, we look at students the same. And this can provide a great opportunity. So I'll give an example of one major that just is exploding in terms of numbers. We have computer science, actually a few different versions of it within Michigan State, but within our College of Engineering. We look at that student who is applying for computer science no differently than that a student who is applying for English. We're evaluating overall for the university. Now, there will be different requirements they have once they start at MSU in terms of academics, and things they have to accomplish. But in terms of the review process for the university, there's no different by major. But where that can help students, and the reason I mentioned computer science, they may have trouble getting into certain schools because that major is so much more sought after, and there may actually be differing admission rates in some schools based on majors, where at a place like Michigan State and other schools that review like we do, they have the opportunity to prove themselves once they get to the university and that door isn't shut.
Well, we appreciate those insights and those distinctions. Thank you both so much for the insightful perspectives on, again, that application review process. And as a follow up, could you each elaborate on how your institutions evaluates other components of the application beyond just the transcript? In other words, what aspects do you consider particularly important, such as, again, the extracurricular activities, essays, letters of recommendation, or any other factors? And are there any specific qualities or experience that your institutions value in applicants? So, Larry, we will start with you. And then, of course, Logan will come to you after. So, Larry?
Sure. Thank you. So we're definitely reading the essay. The essay gives us an idea of somebody's ability to communicate in writing, first of all. And obviously, this is something they're going to need to be able to do to be successful. But it also gives us a window into learning about that student. What is it that they've decided is, the most important that they want to write about and share with us? And so that's always my hope, is that we do, learn more about a student. And I think an essay is an area where a student can set themselves apart a little bit from another student. In terms of activities, we really don't have a favorite at Michigan State. And the reality too is we do have students who work because not just necessarily even that they want to have a little extra money, because the family might need some extra money. They're truly contributing to the family. Or again, there's somebody who needs care who's younger than them, older than them. And definitely we saw a lot of this, during COVID, where they were caring for somebody who was sick, and it might have been a parent, and they might have been the next oldest in the household, particularly if it was a single parent household. And now they were, for a short period of time, kind of running the family. I mean, in some cases, parents were hospitalized, and I've had, students, write about this. And so what you kind of realize too is, I would say, this idea of growth that you can sometimes feel in an application overall. And what I find the best applications are the ones that are the most consistent. There's some applications where you just start reading them and it all makes sense. And the academics make sense and it all flows together. And so I always talk with students about how important it is that it's their words and their thoughts that are truly in the application. It's great to have somebody proofread something, but that it's truly representative of that student, because that's how I also think you achieve that consistency, when it's really one person's thoughts, actions, what they've been involved in.
I appreciate you talking about the essay and how it's important that it's truly representative of the student. A piece of advice that we heard over the podcast episodes is, students, use your authentic voice. If it's vocabulary that you wouldn't use in the spoken language, perhaps don't use it in your essay. Put the thesaurus away. And a piece of advice, not only read the essay to yourself, but record yourself on your phone, students, speaking your essay, and then listen back to the recording to help you determine whether or not that's the right balance in terms of how you want to portray yourself in that great thing we call the essay, because that's really where the essence of your personality can come out, right? You learn a lot from the transcript about the academics. You learn a lot about the student in terms of what they do outside of the classroom from the activity sheet. But that essay is really, students, where your personality will shine. So, Larry, thank you so much for that. And Logan, back to you. Same question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually just want to say 100% agree on the reading it out loud. I had a high school teacher who gave me that advice about essay writing. This teacher said, when you're done writing it, read it out loud. This was before the ubiquity of cellular devices. So I didn't have a cell phone that I could use to record myself, but
Did you have a
but I-
tape recorder? Hit record and play at the same time? That was my experience. Yeah.
exactly. So
Hmm.
it's great advice, and it really does change how you hear your essay. Going back to the question, how we think about the application review process, I'll actually sort of distill it down into three main categories, and maybe this is helpful for your podcast listeners to think about it this way. In no particular order, academic profile. How well have you done, and what academic potential do we see? Number two, or secondly, would be extracurricular involvement, all those things we talked about before, whether it's, student government or volunteer work or, a part-time job, caring for family. And then third, certainly not the least of importance, is character, like community fit. And we look at all of those things, and we look at all of the pieces that go into them. And there's no one piece that is going to allow a student or, determine the outcome for a student. So, if you are, a brilliant student, you're the best academician your high school has ever seen, but you have not been involved in anything, and maybe there are some character questions, it's probably not going to work out at Brown. And
Hmm.
so it's important for students to think about that. It's also important for me to mention, because I talk about these three components, that doesn't mean that applicants have to have a perfectly evenly distributed 33.333 repeating, sense of strength across those three. We do have some applicants who we admit who are really incredibly well-rounded. They're great students, they're really involved, and obviously they're young people of great character. But we also have applicants that we really sincerely, affectionately refer to as well lopsided.
Hmm.
They're really, really, really exceptional at something, and they're also good people, and that's great as well. So I think the message that I would want to share is, don't think that there's a one size fits all for success in this process at a highly selective institution. I also hear this all the time, John. Applicants asking about what worked for applicants in prior years, even if it's from their high
Hmm.
school or from another high school. I get these questions. Well, I heard that a student who won a gold medal in figure skating was admitted to Brown, and well, that worked for me. And I go, well, are you a figure skater? No. Okay, well then it's not going to work for you. But there are other things that you do that are great, and that are noteworthy and meritorious, and that we value, and that are important to you, and that will therefore be important to us. And so it's really important that those students talk about and pursue the things that they're interested in, and know that there isn't a formula in this process. And I know how stressful that is for families who work so hard to understand how this process works, and for students who study hard and they get involved, and sometimes they get the outcomes they want and sometimes they don't. And that can be really, really tough. And I am deeply sensitive to that, because I know how hard it is for those families to get that news. But it's really important to say to those families, that this is why it's important to do the things that you like to do, because there aren't guaranteed outcomes in this process. And so, students should be themselves, and they really have to remember that what worked for an applicant at another high school or in another year is not necessarily going to work for them. And again, there are no formulas. They should do what is best for that individual student.
Well, wow, I really appreciate so much of what you said. One of the things, though, Logan, that I want to touch upon, you said it's not a one size fits all. And you mentioned the fact that students sometimes want to know, what was it about past applicants that got them in? It's almost like they're looking for the Brown University profile in this case. And I'm willing to bet that good advice there would be, you don't want to sound like every other applicant to Brown University, because if your application portrays you like every other applicant, then there's nothing there that's going to make you stand out in a very competitive applicant pool. So I think you want to find, what is it about you, your essence, your personality, what you're interested in, that differentiates you, if you will, from other students. And hopefully that will give you the edge in, again, this very competitive application process. Anything you want to add about that, Logan?
No, that's exactly right, John. I go on YouTube occasionally, and I'll watch these videos from, either current students at at Brown and other institutions, or I see books that are available on Amazon or some other retail site that talk about what I did to earn admission to some long and distinguished list of
Hmm.
schools. And it's always interesting. I love those. I love those stories. I think I find that element of storytelling about what they did is really interesting. But I also always want to be able to sort of chime in and say, that was wonderful and that worked for you, but it doesn't work for everyone. And so, I think what's really helpful is if students go the route of looking at what prior successful applicants did, that they really see the full range, because there is an enormous range, and every student we admit is admitted for their own individual reasons. Again, there is no formula, there is no mold that we're trying to fit. We want interesting and really smart students from across the country and around the world.
Well, we appreciate that. And again, like Logan said, there is not a one size fits all. So don't focus so much on attention, for example, on someone who may have been admitted in the past and you want to replicate, what's perceived as the Brown ideal candidate. Again, you don't want to come off as sounding just like everyone else, because if you do, you're not going to stand out in the process. And I'm not so sure that it's necessarily going to help you, right? You want to show off your unique characteristics that are near and dear and true to who you are as a person. So, thank you both so much for those insightful perspectives, again, on the application review process. So let's discuss demonstrated interest. Logan, could you start by explaining how Brown University tracks and values demonstrated interest from applicants? And Larry, following Logan's response, could you share the same for MSU? Additionally, what advice would you both give to students to effectively show their interest in attending your respective institutions? Again, Logan, we're going to start with you and then Larry.
This is an easy one for me, John, because Brown does not track demonstrated interest.
Right.
Now, that being said, it is really important to get a good sense of the different colleges that an applicant is thinking about. Whether they're at the point where they're thinking about applying, but certainly when they're at the point post admission where they're thinking about where they want to matriculate and then ultimately enroll, where they want to attend college. It is really important to know what that college is, where it is, what the campus is like. And I understand, by the way, that cost can be a factor here. All of us now have really robust virtual tours, virtual information sessions, the ability to get a pretty good sense of the campus and its offerings. And so I highly recommend those resources for families who aren't able to physically visit every campus they might want to consider. So we technically do not track demonstrated interest, but again, we would encourage students either before they apply or after they're admitted to really spend some time getting to know the campus, because there's nothing that can replicate that feeling of just walking around the campus and talking to students. And so while we don't add that as part of the application review, we don't, there are no additional points in the process because there's no formula in our process. There are no points assigned to
Hmm.
anything in our process. It's important for a student and a family to know what the campus is like, but visiting the Brown campus before they apply is not going to be a factor that will determine the outcome of the application, and we do not track demonstrated interest.
Well, we appreciate that. And it goes to show students that even if a school says that they do not track demonstrated interest, as is the case obviously at Brown University, it's still important to do some of those things for your own research to help you determine whether or not the school is in fact the right fit for you. And I would imagine that if there's a supplemental and you have to write about your demonstrated understanding about a school, doing all of those things where you're demonstrating your interest, you're visiting, you're researching, you're doing virtual events and what have you, that's only going to help you in the overall application. So, again, students, it's important to do these things to help find that fit. Logan, it looked like you wanted to say something more.
Yeah, and so John, I'm giving you thumbs up on all of this, and I wanted to add something, and I haven't said this before, but your question's a good one, because you talk about understanding the institution and articulating that through the application, and so I haven't used this term before, but I would say demonstrated knowledge. Demonstrated knowledge of the institution as the applicant expresses it in the application is important. You don't have to visit the campus to be able to demonstrate that, but understanding what the open curriculum is, how you take advantage of the Brown academic offerings, how you would add to the Brown community, how you might like to explore what Providence has to offer. All of those things that can be, written about in the application do matter to us. Understanding how that student may potentially add to our campus. That's absolutely important. So, demonstrated knowledge of the institution is, though we do not track demonstrated interest.
Well, I appreciate you said that. And before we go to Larry, so Larry, you're up next, so get ready. But I just want to repeat something because it's very nuanced, at least from my perspective. You talked about demonstrating your knowledge of the fact that you have an open curriculum, which is great. But students, you shouldn't just write and say, hey, I know that Brown University has an open curriculum. If you heard what Logan said, he said, yes, demonstrating your knowledge, the fact that, again, Brown has an open curriculum, but how would you take advantage of that? How do you see yourself there within that open curriculum? And also, how are you going to contribute to it? That's really the lens that you want to come from, as opposed to just saying, hey, I know that Brown has an open curriculum. So what? That's easy to know, to find out. But again, how do you personalize it? How do you see yourself there? How do you see yourself contributing? Perhaps talk about things that you've done throughout high school, which is in line with whatever their mission or philosophy is. So again, Logan, we really appreciate that. Larry, same question.
Sure. So we are aware when students visit, we are aware when they're interacting with us. It is not part of our review process. What I would say to all students and families, I think the more you learn about an institution, the more you're going to understand whether it's truly, good for you. And I would encourage you, when you have opportunities in your local area, to take advantage of them. So, for example, if you go to a high school and a particular college or university is coming to visit, my recommendation would be to go to the meeting. If, because you have a test in that given period, you can't make it, I would find out from your counseling office who came and send them an email and say, hey, I was intending to come because I'm really interested in Brown University or Michigan State University or whatever the name of the school might be, and let them know that you are interested. And, for parents, if you want to help your students with it, think about it when you're pursuing a job. Would you ever go on an interview and then really think you wanted to work for that company and not follow up? And this is part of the transition for students from, being a high school student to moving into being a more responsible young adult, of learning about these ways of communicating interest. There are ways it can be done, but ways that translate into truly, I feel, the rest of your life. Last week I was in front of a group of about 30 rising seniors at a strong public high school in New Jersey, and I was talking with them about this college admissions process, of which they're all very engaged. And I asked the group, I said, do you have a list right now in your mind of who is your number one school, your number two school, your number three school? Everyone's hand went up. I said, that's great. And that's natural, because in anything in life, when you're thinking about doing something, making a decision, you have in your mind a hierarchy. That's a natural thing. And then I was asking them how many schools they were applying to. And it was significantly more than 3. I'll just kind of leave it at that. Counselors at one point were maybe a little bit disappointed when they saw how many hands were going up above a certain number. And I would suggest this as something to help in terms of even demonstrated interest for students. Any school you're going to apply to, my suggestion is, for every school you're applying to, write down a few sentences of why you want to attend that school. Why am I interested in Brown University? Why am I interested in Michigan State University? And I really think this will help you, because when you're applying, there's an aspect of not really knowing. You may be so fortunate that you get into your 1, 2, and 3 and they never change. Although I will tell you, since we're talking about 17 and 18-year-olds, the likelihood that that ranking changes because there'll also be a lot more information is great. But if you establish in your mind, this is why I'm applying to this school, I think that will really help your mindset and will make you a strong candidate as well, anywhere you're applying, because you're really evaluating your thoughts and your thoughts at that time, and they can change too.
Well, I really love that advice, Larry. For every college you're considering applying to, students, write down why you intend to apply to that college, which will help you establish whether or not that school is the right fit for you. And Larry touched upon it. At the beginning of junior year of high school, you might be thinking of certain schools, but as you're going through the process, that list probably will change, right? But doing what Larry said, I think, is great advice. And I also appreciate what you talked about at the very beginning of your answer, Larry, where we talk all the time how difficult it is sometimes to visit various schools, particularly if they're schools that are far away from home. It could be because of finances. It could simply be because, you want to attend the school while school is in session. And it's very difficult to get, a parent schedule in line with a student schedule and what have you. So we always say if you can't visit before applying, it's certainly good practice to visit before matriculating. But I love what you said in terms of taking advantage of when an admissions rep comes to your high school students, visit with the representative, make sure you have questions ready, questions that are not easily found on their website. Show them that you did your research, be thoughtful and mindful of those questions. And like Larry said, let's say you have a test that day, maybe you're out sick, email the rep. It's okay to email the rep. These people are admissions representatives. They want to admit you, they want to help you, which is why, we have the podcast to also prove to you how accessible they truly are. So, thank you both for those insightful perspectives again on demonstrated interest. Now, let's explore the application just a little bit further. Larry, could you start by discussing the different ways students can apply to MSU, and are there any strategic advantages to choosing one application method over the other? So, again, we're going to start with you, Larry, and then Logan.
Great. Thank you, John, for the question. So, I guess two different parts to this. In terms of application, we have our own application. We take the common application. We take the coalition application. We have zero preference. So, whichever one is easiest for the student, I would encourage them to use that. In terms of application plan, we have early action with the November 1 deadline, or we have a regular decision with actually a April 1 deadline. For us, in terms of the different pools, the outcomes are not necessarily different. So I think a lot of students I find are very anxious to get a decision, and so in those cases, early action makes a lot of sense. I think there are some times where students may think, gee, I've really shown a tremendous upward trend. I want to be able to have more grades to present before they review the application. And so it may make sense to wait for regular decisions so that my first marking period, first half year grades can be submitted. I feel really good and I feel they're going to support this new level I've achieved. And so, that would be to me the greatest reason to wait. Both early action and regular decision are non-binding. So a student has all the flexibility of deciding to go forward or not if they're admitted. So there's nothing, to me, I would say to most, I recommend early action, but then every now and then students will come to me and they'll present their individual circumstances. And, that's again, a big part of this process. It is individual. Even though there's a lot of applications coming in, students, this is all about you. So what might be right even in one school might not be the best in another school. But for us, the pools are not dramatically different.
We appreciate that, Larry. And Logan?
Students who are applying through the QuestBridge program may apply using the QuestBridge app. Students who are not part of the QuestBridge program should submit the Common App and the required supplement. We have two different application timelines or plans: early decision and regular decision. Both processes are exactly the same. The review process is the same. The admission officers who are reviewing the applications are the same. The only thing that's different is the timing. So for early decision, students apply by November 1st and they find out by mid-December. Early decision at Brown is a binding process. So the students who apply to Brown are saying that it is absolutely where they want to go above all other colleges and universities, and they would gladly make that commitment. There is no additional strategic advantage. There's no, there's no added, points in the process because a student applies early decision. It does tell us that they're ready to commit to Brown, and that's a wonderful thing to see, but they still must be academically excellent, involved outside of class, and young people of good character. Regular decision, we have a deadline of January 3rd, and applicants will find out at the end of March, usually the last Thursday in March. And those outcomes can vary. Students can be denied, in which case the process is over, unfortunately. They may be waitlisted, in which case we'll automatically review them if there are spaces available, or they may be admitted. And if they're admitted, they have until May 1st to make their decision.
Well, we appreciate the overview from both of you. So let's go back to the essay. I know we touched upon it a little bit throughout the conversation. What role do college essays play in your admissions process? And can you share an example that was truly memorable while providing any advice on, again, what makes that essay stand out? So let's start with Logan on this one, and then it'll come to you, Larry.
Thanks, Sean. So we've talked about a couple of these examples about demonstrating your knowledge of the institution via the essays, and it's really important, for those students who may be inclined to, use ChatGPT to crank something out that's grammatically correct but not very authentic, not very personal. By the way, we do not allow the use of ChatGPT as part of our application submission process. I should note that because we want the student to do the work, and because really we want to know who they are in their own words, not the words of generative AI. So then, secondly, what I would say is, there are a range of essays that can be successful. I think, again, students should not fixate on, a list of do's and don'ts. There are some things that, that can work well. Obviously, spell check and grammar check. Having someone proofread it for you is always helpful. But it's not like there's a list of 5 topics that are going to get you into every highly selective college or university. What we want to know is, who are you? Tell us your story via the Common App personal statement and then also the supplemental essay questions. I'll be brief about this and just tell you that we really care deeply about the answers to those supplements because those supplemental essay questions are all very Brown specific about an extracurricular activity of interest, about why Brown, about what class they would teach, academic or otherwise, and why. We put a lot of time and thought into it. One of our other questions on the supplement, and it's something that we hope will lift their spirits as it lifts ours, is what brings you joy? And it can be anything, it can be something grand. It can be something, fairly pedestrian. But we want to know what brings our applicants joy. It also makes us really happy to read those essays. The last thing I'd say, again, I think there are a lot of things that students can write about that can, catch our attention and tell us who they are. There were a number of them that I read last year that really moved me and that I thought were really impressive, not just because what they wrote was well written, but also the content and what it revealed about them personally. So I'll just give you one example. One example from the applicant pool last year was from an applicant who wrote about their part-time job working in Walmart as a customer service associate. And they wrote about, the slice of life that they got to experience working at customer service in Walmart. And they said, I interacted with people I never thought I'd interact with. And, in a given day, you literally saw everything, and it exposed them to just, the breadth of personalities and perspectives that are out there in the world. And it really was an eye-opening experience for them, humbling and uplifting at the same time. And I loved it. I just loved the experience, and I loved the way that the applicant wrote about it.
Well, we appreciate that, Logan. And Larry, same question.
Sure. So we do not have supplements. However, I do always recommend to students that if you have more you want to tell us on the Common App, there is a section where you can add additional information. And you may want to provide more context, more information. As you said earlier, John, we don't want to assume. We love to know more about a student and have, a more of a 360-degree multidimensional view. I have some students who talk to me and they say, well, the Common App essay is too limiting. It's too short. And I remind them that Lincoln's Gettysburg Address was less than 300 words. Most feel it was pretty well written. And the point is, being long doesn't make you a better communicator. And being short, I think, forces you a little bit to make those, have those economy with words and figure out what it is you really want to say. I would say one thing to steer clear of, or be very careful with, maybe might be the best way, but particularly in like a Common App essay, but even maybe with supplements as well. When you use the name of the school in an application, be sure you are sharing the correct name with the correct school. I am just sure that, Logan, there have been times where you've read something from an applicant and they reference another school, and that doesn't usually help, the student. It's not like necessarily a hard no, but it doesn't help. It just doesn't help. So you do have to be careful. But I think, even with just a single essay, we can learn more about a student. Using that extra section, we can learn more. When I think of some memorable ones I've read about, some of the ones, and I've seen this, I've read multiple of these, where you have a student where the whole family is a first generation, well, they're the second generation, but they were all born in a country outside the United States, and where the parents speak little or no English. And the student, because they're in school, they're fully bilingual, and they're helping their parents navigate different processes in the United States, in some cases, which almost have to be done in English. And so these students really have I'll say a forced, quick to grow up, type of way to help their parents. And so I've read several on that area, and they're usually quite memorable and just some very interesting, amazing, sometimes funny, sometimes sad stories that go with it. But again, it comes back to, are you able to communicate well? And I think that comes through in any story. I will also say sometimes students feel that they need to be the hero, that they need to kick the winning soccer goal. And the fact that they kick the winning soccer goal is what makes it a great essay. They could have fallen face first in the mud and missed the ball, and it could be a fantastic essay because it's about, hey, how did it affect them and what did it mean to them? And that's what comes through, I think, to us when we're reading those. And that would be one of those things that actually would make it more memorable very often to us, but it's really how it's communicated.
Well, I really appreciate a lot of what you said. Are you able to communicate well, students, right? That's what Larry said. It's not so much about the topic that you end up choosing, right? He referenced that soccer player who fell in the mud and, was able to write a great essay, right? And it's important to understand that it's not the topic, right? So don't stress about that. But whatever you choose to write about, how did it affect you? What was your thought process? What were the questions that you pondered? How did you reflect? How did you grow? How did you pivot? How did it make you who you are today? So again, this has been a fun and insightful conversation. Thank you both so much. Before I get to my last question, I have to ask if there is a question that I didn't ask that you wish I had, or a topic that I simply didn't bring up that you'd like to share with our listeners now. So let's start with you, Larry, on this one. And then, of course, Logan will come to you after.
So I actually thought of two questions. I hope it's okay that I have more than
Absolutely.
one, John.
Absolutely, Larry. Anything for you.
Thank you. So the first one, and I'd be thrilled, obviously, if Logan has any thoughts on either of these as well, is what is the best way to research, a college and university and universities really? And for me, the answer is using college and university websites as opposed to third party websites. And the reason I say that is this. At Michigan State University, we have thousands and thousands of web pages. We are responsible for them. We're responsible that they're updated. If we change a policy, if we change a program, if we have a major that isn't a major or a minor that becomes a major or all kinds of different things, we're responsible for it. We're making changes all the time. Where I have read things about Michigan State and other colleges and universities by third party sites that literally it's information that's 5 years old. And so it's not applicable. And so that would be, one thing I would say in terms of researching is a great way to do it.
Well, I appreciate that, and definitely use the college or university's website for the most up to date and, as Larry put it, most accurate information. So I couldn't agree with you more, Larry. Logan?
I had a couple of questions as well. I will just give one, which sort of moves beyond just the college admission process and thinks about actual college attendance itself, and that is, how do you make the most of the college experience? And I asked that question because I think so many students and so many families are focused on getting in, that they think that that is the end itself. Getting in is the beginning. Getting into college is the beginning of the journey, and I really wish I could spend more time with students and families and say, look, you're spending a lot of time and a lot of energy thinking about just getting into a particular college or set of colleges. Don't forget to think beyond that and think about how to take advantage of the opportunities that these colleges offer, because there are just some incredible schools in this country. And I think it's helpful, even when you begin the college application process, to think ahead. How will you take advantage of the resources that that college or university may offer? Not just because I think it helps you de-stress rather than focus on,
Hmm.
should I write about this essay topic or that essay topic? You can really think about what your life will be like on that college campus, getting to Larry's research point. I think it humanizes the process, it grounds the process, and it allows a family to think beyond just the stress of the process itself, and hopefully the great joy that that student will have at some wonderful school for 4 years.
Well, both of you gave. Oh, Larry, you wanted to say something. Go ahead, please.
Sure. I just wanted to actually add one more question if I can.
Absolutely.
I know I'm cheating on this, but
That's okay, Larry.
the other question I wish you had asked me, because I am asked this a lot,
Mm-hmm.
what is a great role for parents to play
Mm.
in this process? And when I think of this, I think of one actually more than others, because I think it really speaks to parents' life experiences that a typical 17 or 18-year-old would not have. And that's about finances.
Right.
And so I'm going to make this suggestion to your parents out there in the audience. As your son or daughter go through this process, periodically ask them for schools they're considering, they might apply to, or they're thinking about. Parents, make a list for yourself. And what I'm going to recommend is that you go onto the financial aid web pages of those colleges and universities and use the net price calculator for each of those schools that your son or daughter mentioned, and get a sense of what it would cost your family, based on the information you input, for that particular college and university. And in some cases, it may be based on the academics of the students, if there's different merit scholarships or different things that they might qualify for in different institutions. And I say it for this reason, John. Every year, I have students and families calling me very late in the process, late April, and saying, we're really interested. It's not a financial fit for us. And my concern is that students have choice all the way through the process. And parents, I would encourage you, it'll be a hard conversation, but it'll be easier the earlier you have it. If your student has all choices that are not within what the family wants to contribute, and that's just such a individual personal decision, then it's good to have some of those conversations earlier on so the student has a choice all the way through the process. So, in other words, a list is balanced based on whether you can get in and having schools that you might have choices of schools you can have a chance of getting in, but also schools that you can realistically attend based on a family's finances and the willingness and desire to attach a certain investment, in this process.
Well, that's tremendous advice. And so often it's come up to have a conversation about the finances early and often. Larry, I love that you talked about the net price calculator, which each college and university is required to make available. Sometimes it's as simple as finding their financial aid office tab, and there it is, net price calculator. Or if all else fails, search net price calculator, insert school, and you'll find it thanks to that wonderful thing that we call Google. Speaking of wonderful, this was awesome. I can't thank you both enough. Unfortunately, it does lead us to that last question, which is, what are your top 3 pieces of advice that you would provide students and their families going through the college admissions process? Logan, we're going to start with you, and then we're going to end off with you, Larry.
Excellent. Well, thank you, John. I'll start by saying thank you so much for having me. It's really been an honor to be able to participate. And Larry now has 2 podcasts under his belt after this one, so I need to catch up. So please have me back at some point.
We'd love to.
This is my professional life, John, trying to keep up with Larry, and here we are, one more example of this. So,
That's awesome.
my advice is brief. If I had to give 3 points, some of it will sound a little bit repetitive, but I think it bears repeating. Number 1, be who you are. Don't try to be someone else. Don't try to be someone you think we're looking for. We want to see who you are, the applicant, not who you think we want you to be. That's point number 1. Point number 2. We're not looking for perfection. We're human beings. None of us are perfect, and we're not looking for perfection. So, Larry made that great point earlier about the, sort of the humble essay. If you're the slowest student, if you're the slowest member of the cross country team, and you're right about, how valuable that experience was for you, that's great. We love that. Those are great stories and great examples. So don't think that we're looking for perfection. We are not. We're looking for great people to be part of our community. And then the last thing I would say, because there are so many numbers that, get thrown into this process, statistics and, students and families can overanalyze so many things. My last word of advice is listen to your gut. Go with your gut. You can certainly look at the numbers, make sure that the school is the right fit for the, the general principles that you're looking for, make sure that school is affordable, but then also trust your instincts as well.
Well, thank you so much, Logan. It truly was an honor and a pleasure to have you. And by the way, I'm happy to have you back. We'll talk just about Brown University and, frankly, anything else that you want to talk about. So again, Logan, we appreciate your time today. Larry?
Yeah, John, I do also want to thank you for having me back. It's been great to be here and talk with you, to talk with Logan.
Pleasure.
I so enjoy talking to people who are clearly passionate about this process. So 3 thoughts. One would be, students, please ask questions throughout the process and take notes for yourself so you can refer back to them. It should be fun. This is your life. So try to have fun in this process. And finally, this is a journey of exploration. Your thoughts, your interests will change. This is basically the beginning of what is the rest of your life. Enjoy the journey. And thank you so much, and best of luck.
Well, again, Logan, Larry, this was absolutely terrific. I am so grateful that you guys gave of your time, your expertise. So happy, as I know that this is going to help so many students and their parents as they navigate the college admissions process. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
My pleasure. And to everyone out there, good luck with the college process. Take care all, and best wishes. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the CAP, the College Admissions Process Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please don't forget to tell a friend and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and wherever you listen to your podcasts. I am your host, John Durante, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the CAP. Thank you for listening to the College Admissions Process Podcast presented by Prep Expert. Prep Expert offers live online SAT and ACT courses with the best score guarantees, instructors, and curriculum. Go to prepexpert.com to guarantee your child's success.